Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's event, hosted by the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. On behalf of the Delphi Economic Forum, Gati and the Hellenic American Leadership Council, first of all, I'd love to thank FDD for continuing this partnership with the Delphi in DC Forum. I am Andy Zemaniris. It's Monday, February 10th, and today's panel will explore Turkey's Neo-Ottoman ambitions. For some of us, they're not so neo, they're not so new, and there are plenty of people here, and especially among our experts, who may remember Erdogan's victory speech in 2011, when he said, "Believe me, Sarajevo won today as much as Istanbul. Beirut won as much as Izmir, Damascus won as much as Ankara, Ramallah, Nablus, Jenin, the West Bank, Jerusalem." Erdogan has long had his eye on hegemony in the region. And from that speech, we've gotten things like the Blue Homeland, farcical and fictional maritime agreements with Libya, and now the leadership of a new kind of axis of resistance with Ankara leading the HTS, Hamas, Hezbollah, and others. So we have a great group of experts to discuss this and what it means for the region and U.S. foreign policy. Please join me in welcoming our experts. First, Henri Barkey, the Bernard L. and Bertha Cohen Chair in International Relations at Lehigh University and an adjunct senior fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Henri currently sits on the Board of Trustees for American University in Iraq and on the Board of Advisors for FDD's Turkey program. Previously, Henri served as director of the Middle East Center at the Woodrow Wilson Center and a non-resident senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He has written extensively on Turkey, the Kurds, and other Middle East issues. Sinan Çidi is a non-resident senior fellow at FDD and an expert on Turkish domestic politics and foreign policy. He is an associate professor of national security studies at Marine Corps University. Prior to joining MCU, Sinan was executive director of Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Between 2008 and 2011, he established a Turkish Studies program at the University of Florida's Center for European Studies. Jonathan Schanzer is a very happy Philadelphia Eagles fan. He's executive director at FDD, where he oversees the work of the organization's experts and scholars. Jonathan previously worked as a terrorism finance analyst at the U.S. Department of Treasury, where he played an integral role in the designation of numerous terrorist financiers. He has held previous think tank research positions at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the Middle East Forum. Jonathan's latest book, Gaza Conflict 2021, which I wish some people had read long before October 7th, challenges and corrects some of the widely inaccurate news reported during the conflict. Minister Δημήτρης Καιρίδης, who I will distinguish him from the other three panelists because you have to start coming on the Greek current as much as they to compete. You have to do dozens of episodes to catch up. Is a member of the Greece, Cyprus, Israel, U.S. Interparliamentary Committee, which works to increase collaboration in areas of common interest. He previously served as Greece's Minister of Migration and Asylum. Mr. Kyeridis also served as vice chairman of the Parliamentary Committee of European Affairs and as head of the Greek parliamentary delegation to the Conference on the Future of Europe, where he was co-chair of the Working Group on Migration. He's a professor of international politics at Πάντειο University of Athens and has previously published extensively on Greek-Turkish relations. Finally, moderating our conversation, again, we're lucky, another Greek current favorite, Lena Argyri, the DC correspondent for Greek Public Broadcasting and for Gati. She focuses on Greek-related issues for American audiences, and she does a lot on the subject today. Before we jump into today's conversation, a few words about the FDD. For more than 20 years, The FDD has operated as an independent, nonpartisan research institute exclusively focused on national security and foreign policy. As a point of pride and principle, they do not accept foreign government funding, so no FARA issues today. For more on FDD's work, please visit FDD.org, follow FDD on X and Instagram, and subscribe to FDD's YouTube channel. They're everywhere, and they have led the conversation on the Eastern Mediterranean for a number of years. So thank you again for continuing this. Lena?
Thank you, Andy. Thank you all for being here. And of course, thank you for watching online. Huge thanks to the FDD for hosting us for another year. And my deepest gratitude to our panelists for taking the time today. As Andy said, the changes taking place in the Middle East over the past year and a half are truly significant. And it seems like a new order is taking shape before our very eyes. So to discuss these developments, and particularly how Turkey is trying to take advantage of these changes, I'm pleased to be joined, but as Andy said, by Jonathan, Mr. Kyeridis, Henry, and Sinan. And Jonathan, I would like to start with you. Turkey is today the main sponsor, the main backer of HTS in Syria. It has doubled down on its support for Hamas, and in every conflict that Israel has, either with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, or any other actor, it is consistently siding against Israel. So my question is the Erdogan regime building a new axis of resistance? What do you think?
Well, first of all, wonderful to have everybody here today. I think that Erdogan doesn't quite know whether he's building an axis of resistance along the lines of what we've seen from Iran, right, where Iran built 6 or 7 different fronts where it was able to attack Israel simultaneously, called it a ring of fire, right? That's what the Iranians called it. I don't think that Erdogan has that yet. But if you compare what the Iranians began to build, let's say somewhere around 1987, 1988, into the early 1990s, that was a formative period for the Iranians. They began to understand that they could draw proxies closer to Israel, and over a long period of time begin to attack and degrade Israel. And we saw an attempt to activate that over the last year and a half. Erdogan has right now 2 fronts covered, right? He's got Hamas, although Hamas is significantly degraded. If Hamas is rebuilt in any shape or form, Turkey will have a significant role to play in the leadership and guidance of Hamas. But HTS undeniably is a proxy of the Turkish regime. What we need to watch very carefully is whether Turkey tries to expand that further. We know that Turkey has assets in, for example, in the Horn of Africa. I don't know if they would pose direct threats to Israel, but we have to be aware now of the new paradigm embodied by the Houthis, that we now see terrorist organizations that are equipped with longer distance capabilities, ballistic missiles that can fire at Israel from far away. Is this part of the new strategy on the part of Iran or on Turkey? We don't know. But what actually really bothers me the most right now, when I start to take a look at the map post 10/7, we see the Iranian regime and all of its capabilities, all of its proxies have been degraded. And we see the Turks building up some of these kind of new capabilities with new actors. There is a sense, I think an erroneous sense among analysts here in Washington, that there is a competition that is taking place between the Islamic Republic and the government of Turkey, that they are fundamentally at odds with one another. But if one goes back and looks at the last decade or so, what we actually see is a confluence of interests between the Turks and the Iranians in ways that I don't think are appreciated here. I mean, with the case in point for us here at FDD, we did a lot of work on what was known as the gas for gold scheme, where the Turks were literally helping Iran evade American sanctions and to move $20 billion in illicit cash and gold from Turkey to Iran. These are the things that worry me right now, because they don't necessarily need to be operating against one another. They can be working together in their common goal. And Erdogan has made it very clear that he envisions a world in which the entire Middle East rises up against Israel to destroy it.
And we'll talk about in a while. Sinan, what Jonathan just described represents, I would say, a dramatic, a significant change in Turkey's orientation. Can you please explain this change, this evolution from a Turkey that it was, I would say, a relatively good NATO ally and a friend of Israel to what we see today?
Well, we could say there's a long track record of this. It's not new. It's been developing for over a decade now. And many people ask, sort of, as you rightly sort of pointed out, why this sort of escalatory move against Israel? One of the big reasons that Erdogan has essentially consistently said throughout, especially since 2016, when Turkey really took a different trajectory internally, was to suggest that the Western Hemisphere and the Western-led liberal international order was in a steep decline. And as a result of that, Turkey no longer felt under Erdogan's watch to essentially uphold the values, the norms, the principles of the Western-led liberal order. And from that perspective, Turkey has degraded its relationship with NATO, it's degraded its relationship with the European Union, as well as the United States on numerous levels. But the Israeli front, I think, is just a personal front that Erdogan has really decided to essentially latch onto, and that was personal for him. And that's basically, I would argue, rooted in his deeply anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli view, which he made very apparent even earlier than 2016. We can trace that all the way back publicly. You know, when he was leader of Turkey, going back as early as 2008, if I'm not mistaken on the date of this, when he literally started ripping apart the relationship between Turkey and Israel. But I think what really gave him opportunity to capitalize upon that sort of sentiment was October 7 terrorist attacks. And he's really sort of come out forcefully thumping this because, as John said, I think that's his way into essentially wanting to dominate regionally in a way to see if he can establish a new Middle East in this post sort of Hamas, post-Hezbollah space, where Turkey essentially leads this and has a big outside voice to the detriment of Israel. And as far as he's concerned, everything on the drawing table is on the table, right? I think one of the things that we've woken up to in the last couple of months, if not longer, is now that everybody essentially, the euphemism is Turkey now borders Israel, right? Given its control of HTS, some of the other sort of jihadi-aligned militias inside of there, and everybody's wondering to what extent will Erdogan sort of make good on his aspirations to degrade Israel's influence and standing in the region? Will the United States stand up to it? Will the European Union stand up to it? And nobody seems to have an answer to this, but Erdogan is pressing full steam ahead.
Mr. Kαιρίδης, in the midst of all this chaos that we're discussing now, Turkey seems to be ending the period of de-escalation with Greece. The blue homeland doctrine is back on the table. The violations of the Greek airspace have resumed. And, just recently, just a few days ago, it declared that it has rights around the island of Crete. So my question is, at what point does this behavior become unsustainable for Greece?
I think we are at a very critical moment. And we are in peril of losing the little bit of progress that we have achieved the last few years. I think the best way to understand what is happening is to have a holistic view of Erdogan's foreign policy and foreign behavior the last 22-something years that he is in power. And to make a long story short, I would say that you can divide this in three periods. The first period of Erdogan, when he came to power back in 2002 until 2012, 2013, and the Gezi Park demonstrations, one can say that there was a European face. And there was a promise of liberal pro-European reforms. We know in hindsight that this was more tactical than strategic on his part, and that already then he had a transactional view of Europe. He was not a committed Europeanist. He used the European vocation to get rid of armies' political role and influence. As soon as he achieved that, we went into his second phase that was characterized by increased antagonism with its neighbors. He came in conflict not only with Greece, with the Blue Homeland doctrine and the Turkish-Libyan memo he signed for the supposed delineation of the economic exclusive economic zone, but with Israel, obviously, with Egypt, or with the United Arab Emirates, even with Saudi Arabia. Then, after 2021-22, he moved into a third phase, which is not a return back to the initial phase of liberal reforms and no problems with neighbors, etc., but to recalibration from the increased antagonism and militarism that characterized the second phase as a result of the pressure that was exerted on him. And I want to stress the need for that pressure. The moment that the carrot of European membership was removed, the only way to influence the behavior was the stick of pressure. And pressure there was, first and foremost, from the economy, and we have seen a return to more orthodox economic policies, especially on the monetary side internally. And pressure there was from the outside world, not only Greece and Egypt and Israel, but first and foremost, the United States. It was something that started under the final years of Donald Trump, when he was president, with Secretary Pompeo and his expulsion, Turkey's expulsion from the F-35 program, and continued unabated during the Biden presidency. Now, today, Erdogan feels emboldened. Not only because there are certain objective facts on the ground, that is the fact that Turkey is a big economy, member of the G20, it has a certain demographic vitality, it has presence, military presence in various countries around his region, but also because he feels empowered and emboldened by the change in Syria and the change, let us be frank, in the White House. I think it will be a mistake to withdraw from the pressure that there was, which yielded some tangible results in his behavior, both on the economic side and on the foreign policy side, albeit decreasingly so. So I am worried about events in Syria and about the U.S. role in the area, which I wanted to continue being clear and strategically focused. Turkey, and I finish, Turkey is obviously an important country, there is no doubt about that. There are many important countries, obviously. Iran is an important country, nobody can doubt that. But the problem is not the importance, the question is not the importance, the question is the behavior. And in order to have the right behavior, allied with Western interests, now that we live in a world of interests, and we might be thankful to Trump for bringing some clarity, to put it mildly, to U.S. foreign policy, away from that confusion between principles and values and interests that all the previous administrations had. Now that we live in a world of pure and simple interests, the need is to have Turkey's behavior allied with these interests, and the best way is to continue that pressure and not to harm and hurt the balance of power in the area in any sort of way that will put crazy ideas, daring ideas in his mind, in the mind of the regime in Ankara.
We'll talk in a while about the role of the United States in the region, what this role should look like. But Henry, we see Turkey raising tensions both within NATO and also in areas that affect the NATO alliance, like Libya, like Syria, and like Israel. And at the same time, we see Turkey maintaining, if not improving, relations with Iran and Russia. So my question is, has Turkey become a liability within NATO? What do you think?
Well, I mean, look, we are in the process of a major transition. I mean, we still don't know what's going to happen in Washington in terms of what the new president has in mind, not only with respect to alliances in general, but also NATO in particular. But what I would say, given everything else that was said, I think the way to look at Erdogan is slightly different, not differently, I would just put another context to it, and that is, when you think about countries and you talk about the foreign policy of countries, you kind of have an idea that the national interest, we as, we professors have spent time trying to define what national interest is, or we still don't know what it is, but the point here is that there are certain things that are immutable, I mean, that are obviously national interest. But in the case of Erdogan and populist leaders like him, especially one that has been in power as long as he has, and intends to stay in power for much longer, the issue is it Turkey's foreign policy that we're talking about, or are we talking about Erdogan's vision for himself and his vision of Turkey, which may be different than what, let's say, other people in Turkey think. I mean, in a way, what I'm trying to say is that foreign policy for Erdogan is both a way for him to achieve his own aims and ambitions and be essentially one of the great leaders of the world. He definitely sees himself as one. He sees Turkey as obviously as one of the great powers. I mean, almost from the beginning, when he came to power, if you remember, he talked about the United Nations being bigger than 5, and he used to take his hand up there. And he always had a vision that Turkey, representing the Islamic world, should be a permanent member of the Security Council that Turkey had. And he did succeed, let's face it. I mean, he allowed Turkey to economically expand. He improved relations with a whole series of countries. He made Turkey an important actor in world politics. The thing is here that foreign policy is a vehicle for his own personal advancement, and I would say, and this is, I think, very critical, his own protection. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you look at Turkey today, yes, you look at all the policies that Erdogan advocates, but at the end of the day, foreign policy is the thing that will save him. Look, he is not in a very enviable situation. His economy is suffering. Right? He has serious problems. He has lost the major cities. I mean, he's great. Look at what he's doing. Every day, more people are going to jail on completely nonsensical reason. You wrote a tweet 7 years ago, boom, you get arrested. The mayor of Istanbul, who clearly is the most important potential contender against him, is being charged right, left, and center, and they're gonna find him guilty of something and then and make him ineligible to run. Why is he doing this if he was that confident at home? If he was that popular at home? I think he realizes that if there were genuine elections tomorrow, he would lose. Why not? I mean, look, he's been in power for that long. I mean, people get tired of their leaders. And so that's one big issue he's confronting. And for him, foreign policy then becomes an instrument to distract attention, to make speeches every day, to even maybe do something, whether it's in Syria or elsewhere, that will mobilize nationalist opinion. And look, and the other thing is, he does have a serious Kurdish problem. He's trying to figure out a way to go around it because he needs the Kurds to get another term in office. But the Kurdish issue is also very tied to what's happening in Syria, in that, yes, he does want to get rid of the YPG in Syria, but the Kurds in Turkey hold the key to this, because Turkish Kurds are very attached to Rojava and so he had a peace process at one point that failed, and now he's talking about another one. He doesn't. I mean, in my view, I don't think he's sincere and wants to take it through. But this is all about protecting himself. So I think we should look at foreign policy. And I did not answer your question in a direct way. Whether or not he's a liability in NATO or not really depends on what it is NATO or any particular issue brings to his survivability. And that's the most important issue. That's what he goes to bed thinking about, and that's what he gets up thinking about.
Thank you, Andrei. Jonathan, from Erdogan's efforts to protect himself, let's talk a bit about his relationship with Iran. And you mentioned that sometimes this relationship is complicated. So the US is expected to return to a maximum pressure policy towards Iran. The president already signed this executive order. How this development will affect Erdogan's role in the region?
I do think that to some extent, even though I don't believe that Turkey and Iran are in competition, I do think that Iran's loss could be Turkey's gain. I think we need to watch that dynamic very closely, right? We're watching maximum pressure will take hold. It means that the cash reserves of the regime will dwindle. That means that its ability to pay its proxies will dwindle. That means that, for example, Turkey will have probably greater sway over the Iranians, over Hamas than Iran does over time. They'll be able to find, I mean, we saw this, by the way, during the last round of significant sanctions. This was when the Qataris and the Turks began to fill the void left by Iran because of the sanctions pressure that was put on the regime by the United States. I think there will be some interesting questions about whether the Europeans join this pressure campaign. Last time around, we really saw a divergence between the Europeans and the United States as it related to a wide array of foreign policies. I'd like to see them more aligned, but we could begin to see this sort of bifurcation, the Europeans deciding to put pressure on one actor, the US putting pressure on another. But in short, I think we're heading into a moment of chaos, and I think that is a place where Erdogan is going to thrive. Erdogan likes the lack of assertiveness. Perhaps if the US decides we're going to leave Iraq, we're going to leave Syria, this is a benefit for him at the end of the day. And I think that's where I think we need to keep our eyes right now, is how much we decide to pull back from the region. It's one thing to say we're going to put pressure on the Iranians and to put more sanctions pressure on them. But if we leave the region, I think the Turks will be able to fill some of that void. The Iranians will be able to fill some of it as well. So a lot to keep our eyes on right now.
Mm-hmm. Sinan, I would like to turn to the domestic front with you. And how do Turkey's internal political dynamics shape foreign policy choices, like, let's say, the relationship with or the support for groups like Hamas and other terrorist groups? And what I'm really asking here is, does Erdogan really see Hamas as a resistance movement, or is he trying to satisfy his electoral base? I mean, you gave the answer a while ago because you said, you talked about his deep anti-Semitic views that he has expressed repeatedly.
I would also say that Henri touched upon a lot of the points pertaining to the question, but it's probably worth augmenting some of them. I would say that, look, domestically, I agree, Erdogan is vulnerable. And as boisterous and as buoyant as he looks politically, as threatening as he looks on the world stage, in rhetoric and tone, I also think he's very vulnerable politically internally, and possibly more vulnerable than we estimate or can calculate. But I also think that's precisely what makes him very dangerous on the international stage, because he is at some level cornered. His domestic posturings at home, whether it's outward explicit verbal support of Hamas, or material support of Hamas, whilst that may benefit him politically at home because he preaches on a daily basis saying, you know, the Israeli state is a genocidal state, and Hamas is essentially a resistance movement to counter that. That gets him a lot of claps initially, but at this point, some years into a significant economic degradation in the country, where people are literally eating out scraps out of trash bins, that's not going to carry him very far. Overall, when several Hamas leaders were killed by the Israelis, and Erdogan put forward a national day of mourning, you could see rumblings within Turkish public opinion saying, why the hell are we mourning the death of terrorists? I mean, you saw this play out on national airwaves in Turkey. I mean, people were not happy about this. So he's trying to instill this sort of distraction amongst the people to say, our focus should be on, our foreign policy goals and priorities, and, try to sort of put up Israel as a straw man threat to Turkey. But at a fundamental level, you can see this as a deep sign of weakness on his part, because he needs essentially anything to deflect at home from voters focusing on how bad economic conditions are. And just to put this in context, Turkey at this point, Argentina was the world record holder for annual inflation. Turkey may have just about stepped up to second, if not first place, close ties to Venezuela at this point. So it's pretty grim internally. But another way of answering your question, I would say, and that's probably I would consider the most important aspect, would be to suggest that, look, our sort of frettings about Turkey at FDD or like-minded organizations, this is not a boutique problem for us. I mean, Turkey is not just an exclusively small problem, located in the Eastern Mediterranean as far as the Greeks or the Cypriots are concerned. This is, I think the European Union should be a little bit more alarmist about this. Washington should be more alarmist about this. Turkey is a regional problem and a threat at a number of levels that is not being taken seriously. I say that because pick your region. If it's the Mediterranean or the Eastern Mediterranean writ large, Turkey is essentially escalating a posture to dominate that region navally, in terms of its naval build-up, but also its continuing and renewed escalatory threats towards the Greek islands, as well as possibly Cyprus going forward. That's unclear at this point, but we can see rumblings already starting. If you look at Syria, all I see from the perspective of the European Union, or Brussels, let's just put it, is just concern about refugee flows. They're less alert about the fact that Turkey is helping to groom, nurture, and essentially prop up what the Europeans are sometimes calling a moderate regime inside of Syria. I cannot, for the life of me, see what is moderate about a guy who has decades of ties to Al-Qaeda, if not the Islamic State. But because they don't know what to do with it, let's just call him a moderate and invite him to meet with President Macron and other European officials, because if we wish it well, it might just magically appear. We're also seeing Turkey as a major enabler of Russian ambitions continuing in Ukraine. We just released a publication today that traces Turkey funneling over $5 billion of Russian monies, which was essentially Russian oligarch money essentially, having free access to international markets, right, under the pretense that that money was coming to Turkey to help develop its nuclear power plants. And American correspondent banks, Citigroup and JP Morgan were implicated in this. The Biden administration was aware of this. Treasury officials wanted to grab those assets. They were prevented doing so by the Biden administration because they didn't want to upset Turkey. This is what I mean about lack of alarmism in these. So it's undermining our sort of ability to counter Russia as it goes on. And the final thing I'll say, that why we should also be alarmed in this, and this is in the very early stages, again, we've written about this in the last 2 weeks, is Turkey's potential ambitions to develop nuclear weapons technology is distinct from its nuclear power priorities at home. We are seeing that initial agreements signed between Turkish officials and officials in Niger for uranium sourcing. We don't know where that's leading going forward, but the conversations that we've had and how we've written them up seems to suggest that there's an ulterior motive, that the Turks are interested not simply just remaining conventional in the region, but they have greater aspirations which should be taken more seriously.
Mr. Kαιρίδης, as Sinan said, Turkey is a regional problem, but does Turkey's alignment with all these actors that we're discussing here today create a special, a unique challenge for countries like Greece that have remained committed to the NATO alliance, to the European Union, and have maintained excellent relationship both with the US and most countries in the region, in the Middle East?
Well, we have a lot of work ahead of us, and we need to calibrate our narrative and rhetoric to make it more comprehensible to the new guys in Washington. Because I believe that a lot will depend on Washington's position in the Middle East. And I don't have much faith in the Europeans as much as I would like to. They don't know the region, they don't understand the power politics of the region. It's like a different code, a different language. That have a great difficulty in understanding. And if the region is left on its own, then Iran's withdrawal and weakening will be to Turkey's benefit for whatever that might bring to regional stability. Turkey is not a Greek problem only, exactly as it was just said. It is a regional problem. It's a problem for Egypt. It's a problem for the Emirates. It's obviously a problem for Israel. It is a problem first and foremost for Armenia or the Kurds. It's a wider problem, and we need to continue working with allies and making sure that Washington understands its interests, that unless we keep it on a tight leash, to put it in few words, Turkey will become even a bigger problem for NATO, for NATO's unity, etc. The last few years, we have had a few successes thanks to the pressure. The fact that Turkey lifted its veto to Sweden, the fact that Turkey entered into a dialogue with Greece, the fact that it's reversed its unorthodox policy internally and showed some signs of rapprochement with the Kurds were encouraging. Because I think at the end of the day, Erdogan, for all his delusions and illusions of grandeur, is a realist actor who is responsive to cost and benefits and to pressures. And we just need to make that clear. If he continues to dominate Syria, if we abandon the Kurds there, if we allow him to sign an illegal agreement with Syria on exclusive economic zone and bring him in Damascus, then it is up to us to blame for allowing all this. So my being here today in this wonderful institution that has done so much to alert us to the risks and dangers and to exit from this complacency that has characterized much of the Western approach to Turkey is exactly that, a call that we need to be alert, we need to be vigilant, we need to continue having it as a priority. Otherwise, we will enable the fleur du mal, the flowers of evil, to flourish once again, and we cannot afford that.
Andre, given everything that we've been discussing about Turkey's increasingly independent, disruptive, and unpredictable foreign policy, can you please help me understand why do we still see people and players here in DC continue to support and even trust Turkey? And of course, we don't know yet if President Trump will withdraw from Syria, but if he does, that would be a huge victory for Erdogan. And instead of handing him strategic gifts, how should the US recalibrate its approach?
First of all, Is President Trump going to withdraw from Syria? Well, yesterday he stopped minting the pennies, so he can do just about anything he wants. No, but seriously speaking, first of all, look, Turkey has had very independent foreign policy, and as I tried to explain, kind of a Erdogan-indexed foreign policy that serves him more than maybe the country. But the relationship between the United States and Turkey is really long-standing. You have to understand that on a daily basis, if you're at the State Department or anywhere else in the US government, you have hundreds and thousands of interactions with Turkish officials on the other side. I mean, there is essentially a very strong, they have to cooperate. I mean, we have bases there, we have citizens, we have all kinds of things for which we have to continuously talk about. So there is a tradition, certainly in the State Department, of working with Turkey. And, you know, just like on every issue, there are divisions in the government, and maybe some officials, as you said, trust Turkey. But I think you can't divorce a relationship that is that long and expect it to turn and suddenly become adversarial. Yes, there are issues over which they have disagreed. And look, for the longest time, Turkey thought that he could get away with just about everything and decided to buy the S-400s, was many times warned, didn't believe that the United States would take action, and the United States did take action. And it was really the most significant event, I think, in terms of the recent years between Turkey and the United States, that to this day has a very serious impact, because it prevents the Turks from acquiring certain things, and it also forces the Turks to try to look at alternatives, but it is not a situation where the Turks are happy about. So it's not a relationship that's always hunky-dory. I mean, I think that's very, very important. But there is another thing I would like to bring up in this context on Syria and whether or not U.S. should or should not withdraw. The last time President Trump tried to pull out, and there was a reaction in the U.S. government, as you know, the conditions were very different. We're dealing with a completely different Middle East today. We're dealing with a Middle East where Syria, I don't know if anybody really knows what's going on in Syria. We have a government that a friend of mine who was traveling extensively in Syria last few weeks said to me, yes, they control Damascus, Homs, and Hama, but the rest of the country is not under their control. Right? Shara has decided on his own that it will take 4 to 5 years to have a transition. It's really not his call, really. I mean, nobody has been asked in Syria whether or not this is what they want. And we are really at the very beginning of this change in Syria. And there's, I think, probably the realization emerging, both in Washington and elsewhere, that the Kurds in Syria are one of the most stable elements, and therefore don't muck around with something that is working. And in this, so I would be very surprised if President Trump would remove the troops, because it's not just that the Turks will move in, but you have 15,000 fighters, ISIS fighters, and 40,000 family members. Well, some of the fighters are in jail. Sorry, it's 10,000 fighters and 45,000 family members. And the family members are in camps. And most of the family members are young kids, right, who have been socialized in ISIS literature and ISIS. So what are you going to do with them? The Turks said, oh, you know, Shara can take care of them. Shara can't control the countryside, let alone a force as formidable as ISIS. And the Turks, why would the Turks should take on such a very difficult job? So I think thinking on the Kurds is changing. And also, in reference to the things I said in the previous segment, the fact that Erdogan is also trying to figure out a way out of his Kurdish impasse at home has a lot to do with Rojava. If he could come up with a compromise whereby the quote-unquote PKK fighters who are in Syria, I mean, you have also to remember that the Syrian Defense Forces are between 70,000 and 110,000, which is much greater than, by the way, HTS is. And so some of them are foreign fighters, some of them are PKK fighters. You can come up with a situation where the PKK fighters move out and what remains in Syria are purely Syrian SDF fighters. And that might be a compromise he will sell to the public as saying, look what I succeeded in doing. But it's not just Syria that's up. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen in Lebanon. We don't know what's going to happen in Iraq. So the administration here has to kind of just sit down and try to look at the situation and try to figure out what it wants to see happen because one mistake now can unleash a whole series of other consequences that it will have no control over. So I suspect that we won't see a pull-out.
Jonathan, absolutely. The circumstances are different this time around than the last time that President Trump tried to do the same thing with the U.S. Troops over there. But if Trump does pull out of Syria, what would that mean for Turkey's regional ambitions? And would something like that be in line, would be consistent with the U.S. interests?
Look, I don't think this would be in line with U.S. interests. I think this would be a disaster for U.S. interests. I think what we would probably see is an expansion of HTS power in ways that I think we don't want to see. We keep talking about trying to respect minorities and rule of law and things like that. And I think the moment that you pull American troops out is the moment that you signal to Erdogan and his, now it's very clear this is his proxy, that there is no sheriff any longer. There is no one there that is maintaining order. I think this would be very likely a disaster for Jordan. That small border shared with Jordan is crucial. Now, we know that for a time when the Iranians were effectively in charge of Syria, that they had allowed for the smuggling of Captagon as well as weapons and cash and fighters crossing that border on a regular basis, and that was highly destabilizing. I think that look, when we look at Erdogan, he's Muslim Brotherhood at the end of the day. And I think that the Turks and the Qataris look at Jordan as an opportunity. They look at Jordan as a vulnerable state that could be compromised or even toppled. And so I think that would be a disaster. I think that the U.S. has held the line in ensuring that, for example, ISIS has been contained. I'm still not fully convinced that HTS wants to keep ISIS at bay. I think they could see them as partners in some shape or form. I mean, this was, of course, the origins of the relationship before, and the fact that people are telling us right now that HTS has had a full divorce from ISIS, it's just based on words. It's not truly based on deeds. And so the U.S. has played a crucial role here in the containment of several crises. By the way, I would also even just look westward at the border between Syria and Lebanon. This was, of course, another border that was heavily compromised. The Iranians were using this as a means to smuggle weapons and cash and other resources into Lebanon to support Hezbollah. I don't see why HTS wouldn't continue to do that if it really did seem like they had full control and no one was watching. But one thing that I actually want to just come back to here, and I think everyone here has touched on this in the panel today. You know, we continue to talk about Turkey as an ally of the United States. I think to a certain extent, we've lost touch with what it means to call countries allies of ours. In other words, there has to be some kind of a contract where we say this is what we expect of our allies and this is what we're willing to give you in return. A bit of the transactionalism that I think that you mentioned just about, you know, interests between countries. But I think that we have lost sight of that. I don't think that we make our demands clear. I think we have allowed for countries like Turkey to continue to test the limits of our alliance structure, of our generosity, of our willing to work with them. Now, in the past, we've seen the United States take steps to slap the wrist of Turkey when it has gone a bit far beyond where we're comfortable. The F-35, for example, was a big one. Actually, even Trump, during his last term, imposing sanctions on members of the Turkish cabinet. There were, I think, important moments. Now, when you ask what will Trump do in this next go-around, I hope we see more of that. I think those are the sorts of steps that need to be taken to let Erdogan understand the limitations. I understand he has ambitions, and a lot of countries do, but we need to make sure that if he wants to stay inside the alliance structure that we've created, that there's a limit to what he feels comfortable doing and that he knows that there will be ramifications for stepping beyond that boundary. I don't think that's been made clear recently, and I do hope that Trump is able to convey that in some shape or form. One last note, though, I will say that after the HTS conquest of Syria, Trump did come out and say something quite interesting. He said, well, Erdogan's my friend, but I'm concerned about what has happened in Syria, and this has my attention. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. He said it much more eloquently than I did. But the point being is that I think he is aware of the problems. Now it's a question of how do we begin to express that regionally and directly to Erdogan.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Kαιρίδης, one last question for you, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A session. So you said before that pressure is necessary to contain Erdogan's ambition. So what are the chances realistically that the new U.S. administration will adopt a stricter policy towards Iran? I would say zero, but what do you think?
Well, I wouldn't be so pessimistic. I think it's an open question, and it's up to us to do the good job to persuade our American friends that the easiest and cheaper way to serve American interests is to keep him on a leash in order to become, if possible, a more reliable ally. I do not dispute the importance of Turkey, and I did not come here in Washington to say that Turkey is this and that and the other. But for sure it has demonstrated, to put it mildly, that it has been an unreliable, an ambivalent ally. In order to combat that ambivalence, you need some guarantees on the ground. The hard way is to have American troops on the ground. The easier way is to have your proxies and your friends in the region to do your job. And to put it explicitly, and now that we are coming to the end of, before we open up to the discussion so that everybody understands it, to make sure that both Greece and Israel have a quality superiority when it comes to air power and the other instruments of pressure in order to dissuade Erdogan from entertaining any bad thoughts. I think we had a few successes the last 3-4 years, although we could have many more. But it shows that if we continue that path, which President Trump, by the way, and I salute him for that, opened up back in 2019. He was the US president that threw Turkey out of the co-production agreement for F-35. Because if Turkey today had those 130 F-35s, it would have been a different kind of Turkey and behaving completely different in the Aegean, in the Eastern Mediterranean, even in the Middle East. The fact that it doesn't is to the benefit of stability, and at the end of the day, to the benefit of Turkey itself, because, to the Turks at least, to the simple Turkish folk. This adventurism abroad only feeds polarization, toxicity, authoritarianism at home. And it's not to the benefit of Turkish society. And at one point that I keep on having in mind, the demographic question. Erdogan, in his grandeur, illusion of grandeur, as I said, Turkey is important, is strong, but not as strong as Erdogan and other autocrats in Ankara believe. It's not only the economy, it's also the demographic collapse that we have witnessed the last 10 years. It's something that has not been noticed abroad. It hasn't made the headlines. But the most surprising development the last 10 years has been the tremendous decline in Turkey's fertility rate, which is 1.5 right now per woman in reproduction age, less than the European average. And it's high in the Kurdish areas, almost 3. It's less than Greece in the western side of Turkey, to show you how much it's 1.1, 1.15, very, very low, which means that Turkey will never become a country of 100 million people and will start declining in 10 years' time, its population, following, of course, the decline of the rest of Europe.
Many more questions for you guys, but we're running out of time, so we'll move to the Q&A session, and I think that the first question will go to my friend Aykan over there.
Aykan Erdemir, Anti-Defamation League. Thank you for this great panel. I have a question for Henri to begin with. I want to follow up on your distinction between Turkey's foreign policy and Erdogan's foreign policy, or whether there is such a distinction. Which also begs the question, what will be Turkey's foreign policy after Erdogan, right? There is one data point which challenges the notion that there is a distinction between Erdogan's foreign policy and Turkey's foreign policy, and that is when ADL released its Global 100 survey last month, Turkey, alongside Indonesia, was one of the world's 2 non-Arab countries in the worst 15 countries in the anti-Semitism index, meaning Indonesia and Turkey are the only 2 non-Arab countries that are one of the worst, that has one of the worst levels of anti-Semitism. And what makes the Turkish case interesting, for your perspective, is whether you're left-wing or right-wing or centrist, whether you have elementary school level of education, secondary school or tertiary school, the anti-Semitism level is the same. And also globally, Turkey is, if I'm not mistaken, that has the highest level of agreement with the statement that Jews have too much control over the government, which shows that there is surprising, in 2024, 2025, there is surprising uniformity across Turkish political and demographic spectrum when it comes to some of the tenets of what we might consider as Islamist or Neo-Ottoman foreign policy. So my question to you is, has Neo-Ottomanism / Islamism / ultra-nationalist irredentism, with all its anti-Semitic undertones, become hegemonic in Turkey, that it's no longer an Erdogan issue, but it's a Turkish issue? And a policy question to Minister Kαιρίδης, my good old friend from Harvard, which means changing Turkish foreign and security policy into a more cooperative one requires also public diplomacy outreach, right? To remedying the population level values and attitudes. Now, what initiatives would you have in mind on the part of Greece? And what initiatives would you also recommend to Israel when it comes to engaging the Turkish public so that there can be a post-Erdogan Turkish foreign and security policy that's not rooted in conspiracies, anti-Semitism, irredentism, and radicalism?
Look, I would not take the rise of anti-Semitism necessarily as an indicator for the convergence of Turkish and Erdogan's foreign policy. I mean, there's so much daily propaganda on that issue. I mean, let me give you a very pertinent example. When President Trump made a suggestion about what to do with Gaza, interestingly, Erdogan did not say anything. And The opposition went on the attack. There was a pro-Palestine demonstration that the opposition organized the other day, and they kept saying, "You're not saying anything. You're not saying anything to Erdogan." And I think what Erdogan was trying to do is trying to figure out how am I going to answer that, given the fact that you're dealing with essentially a new American president, well, an old new American president who's quite unpredictable. And finally, he came up with a solution, and basically he said he condemned unequivocally what Trump said, but he attributed it to the Zionist lobby that made Trump say this, right? Turning, I mean, in a way, but the point is, this is, anti-Semitism is being used, but it doesn't necessarily mean that Turkish foreign policy is necessarily following. The anti-Semitism in Turkey has always been there, and given the propaganda at home. Look, Erdogan blames the United States for everything in Turkey. Bad economy, egg prices, you name it. When you do surveys in Turkey and you ask which country is the greatest threat to Turkey, 70% of the Turkish population says the United States. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that there is, again, a convergence. It's just that he's using this for his own ends, and I wouldn't take those 2 points essentially as proof. And Erdogan's, by the way, Erdogan's foreign policy over time has been very has changed. I mean, he was pro-Israel at the beginning, then he went against Israel, then he tried to make up relations with Israel again, because depending on the situation, he changes, right? And let's be honest. There's been a lot of Israeli tourists and Israeli businesses that established themselves in Turkey before the Hamas war. Now they've all gone, but they. Even though there was a great deal of anti-Semitism, Israelis were working quite well in Turkey. So I'm not really sure that that's much of an indicator.
I understand where Henry comes from, and I understand the distinction, but I think there is a danger in making too much of that distinction, as there is a danger in making too much of and blame the person of Trump, for example, for the changes in U.S. policies abroad. I think there are continuities as well, and there are structural issues, and that these leaders are products of their times and accelerators of changes that were bound to happen as well. So I would say that the truth is somewhere in the middle, rather than this distinction between Erdogan policy and Turkish policy, American policy and Trump policy, and to have a much more nuanced kind of approach. Now, if I were to choose one, I was a minister for 1 year. If I were to choose one tangible measure that I really took in that regard, was to persuade my European colleagues in introducing a visa facilitation program with Schengen for Turkish citizens visiting Greek islands. It was attacked by nationalists, especially in my country, thinking that the Turks are coming to conquer. It was a very successful initiative that increased 175% the Turkish visitors in Greek islands last year, and brought an additional almost €500 million of revenues for the local economies. And it sent a very powerful signal to the Turkish city in bringing the two societies closer together, and in sending a signal of respect for Turkish citizens. Turkish citizens rightly feel being disrespected by the border controls and the long visa Schengen procedures they have to go through. It was very difficult to persuade my German colleagues, because if you don't know it, in Germany, the second largest number of asylum seekers are Turks these days. And the last thing the very embattled Scholz coalition governments needs is to make it easier for Turks to travel into Europe. And there was huge resistance, but nevertheless, I managed to persuade them, because you need a unanimous decision and the Commission to proceed with that measure, to the point where now I'm meeting with the hawks of the previous Erdogan government, you know, Akan and Çavuşoğlu, who Erdogan has sparked to the parliament. And I am the head of the Eddie forgot to mention. Eddie mentioned all my previous titles and not the current ones, but it's okay. I forgive him. So,
I just need to ensure that we're going to get another one last question. If
as head of the Greek NATO delegation and head of the Greek Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, I'm meeting with these guys who are now, they left. Now you have new people, Yarlika, and Fidan, much more polished compared to Akar. Right? So they are very angry that all the money comes to Greek islands, and the Turkish hotel owners complain. But I think this is how we should proceed with Turkey. Not only to give them money and bribe them, but respect.
Just so we...
Stop. I'm not going to speak again.
Hello. From the Alexis Tsipras Institute, I had one comment and two questions. So, your comment reminded me, the reference was that President Trump would leave a vacuum in the area that possibly would be filled. I think it's a bit more dangerous than that. Our experience from 2019, in October 2019, was that when he didn't find support from the French, the British, the Germans on the ground in Syria, he called President Erdogan, had a talk with him, and after that talk, gave him a green light for a mild incursion, as he said, not a big-scale incursion, but a mild incursion, which changed the situation completely. So not only is there the threat that he'll leave a vacuum, but it's that he'll actually consider to delegate a role to Turkey, as he did in 2019, where he gave a green light for Turkey to be there. And when he was asked about it, he said, well, the French wouldn't help, the British wouldn't help, the Germans wouldn't help, Turkey can have boots on the ground. What ensued after that was a terrible period also for Greek-Turkish relations. We had the illegal Turkish-Libya agreement that we talked about before. We had the migration crisis in Evros, which was successfully confronted by the Greek government. We had the Oruç crisis. So I think the risk is that the relationship between Trump and Erdogan in Syria, just like it was in 2019, will give a blank check, or at least more flexibility to Turkey to move around in the Eastern Mediterranean with a tolerance from the Trump administration. Based on that, three questions. First of all, the foreign minister of Greece was in Syria yesterday, and I'd like to ask Minister Kαιρίδης if he's...
The live stream's going to end before you
I'll be fast.
We only have 2 minutes left.
Can Greece have a role in Syria, and how important could that be? And secondly, how important can Israel be in protecting the Kurds in Syria? Thank you.
Yes, Jonathan.
I can answer the second question. But actually, one brief comment on the vacuum and the delegation of Turkey. A key component of that is the fundamental distrust that exists between the Western European powers and the Trump administration. The Trump administration asked Europe to start spending more in NATO to prepare for a Russian invasion. They thumbed their nose at him. They never took him seriously. And they are now reaping the whirlwind because they never thought he'd come back. And we're going to see a very interesting dynamic play out between the Western Europeans and Trump. And I do think that how that is resolved could have immense influence on how Turkey and the U.S. work together as it relates to this vacuum. As it relates to the Kurds, I think the Israelis have stated very clearly that they want to see the Kurds remain in northern Syria. They want to see them protected. But I will say that when you look at the long list of priorities that the Israelis have, with Iran being at the top and all the other chaos that surrounds them in the region, the Kurds fall to a much lower priority. And so I don't think the Kurds can rely on the Israelis for long-term support. They may get training, they may get intelligence, they may even get weapons, but don't expect the Israelis to intervene on their behalf.
Mr. Kyeridis, we need to stay on time, so you have 1 minute.
Because we are on the record, I will keep the 1 minute and I will not say much. But if there was a need for our Syrian friends to be reminded that EU aid and EU policy needs Athens' consent, you must be sure that the reminder is there. And therefore, it was a productive meeting in Damascus with our foreign minister. We take special interest in the fate of Christians and the Christian communities of Syria for obvious reasons. And there is renewed now contacts with Antioch and the various other churches in Syria, the Assyrians, etc., as you know.
Great, you kept your promise. Thank you, gentlemen, for this wonderful discussion. Thank you all for being here, for those watching online, and thanks again to the FDD.